So, welcome to the Black Archive Safer Home Virtual Series. My name is Louis Berthen. I'm the Assistant Archivist, and today we're going to be doing my segment, which is called Legacies, Profiles in Greatness. And today we're going to be talking about the Reverend Father John Edwin Culmer. So, I have a photo of him right here. And we're going to be talking about his legacy, what he did for us here in Miami. And yes, I am a huge soccer fan, so hopefully we have a good season next year. So let's get started. All right, so John E. Culmer was born on Savannah Sound, Eleuthera, the Bahamas on May 22nd of 1891 to Edwin James and Ellen Spiro Culmer. Hello everyone who's joining in. We're talking about John E. Culmer. So his father was a farmer and his mother was a school teacher. His father actually wanted him to take the farm and run it from him, but he had other plans. John Culmer wanted to become a minister. So he attended schools in the Bahamas, attending both public and private in the area, and he actually migrated to the United States in 1911. And he settled in Coconut Grove. He was around 20 years old at this point. Before this, however, it seems that he had made a trip to New York and Philadelphia, trying to join the seminary, but it seems that he was turned away due to his race. So he settled in Miami after this. And when he arrived here, he still had the intention of completing his education and becoming a clergyman. His first job after arriving here was actually clearing land for construction, and he also worked for the maintenance department of St. Albans Parochial School. He taught music there as well. According to some sources, he also managed the Burdine's outlet store in Coconut Grove. So, after working for a little, he was able to get a work scholarship and with some financial assistance from Mr. and Mrs. Arthur James Curtis of Coconut Grove. He received a bachelor's degree in music from Oskaloosa College in Iowa and a second bachelor's degree in divinity from the Bishop Payne Divinity School. So he was ordained into the Episcopal diaconate in September of 1919 and the priesthood in March of 1920. So after being ordained, he served as a priest of St. James Episcopal Church in Tampa. He served in this capacity for 10 years. He was an outstanding religious leader and civic leader for his congregation. And while he was here, he served in the Tampa Urban League. Under his leadership, they expanded from a 3 to a 9-person board. Under his leadership, they also instituted an employment bureau where they mostly helped young women find work as domestics. He also helped with the development of fairs for the Black community where different groups would show different projects, and at some point the president of FAMC actually came to speak at one of these events. So for those of you who already know John Culmer's history here in Miami, I actually did some digging, so I'm going to give you guys some enlightenment as to what he was doing in Tampa. So we're going to read from a couple newspaper articles I found. So this is the first one, which was published in March 3rd of 1929. Urban League gives aid to many Negroes. In a lengthy report of the activities of the Tampa Urban League presented to the officers of the organization by Reverend John E. Culmer, Executive Secretary, it is shown that the organization has accomplished much among the Negroes of the city since September 1st, 1928. The report shows that 2,266 persons were served by the League from September 1st, 1928 to February 28th, 1929. It's a lot of people. Persons applying for work numbered 859, while 344 employers requested workers. The League succeeded in placing 294 persons. One of the greatest problems this department has been caring for the aged, the report stated. Clothing, food, and other necessities of life were given in 526 cases. This is another article, also from June 15th of 1929. Negro Voters League will make charter campaign. A campaign to stimulate greater interest in elections among Negroes eligible to vote will be undertaken by the Negro Voters League, which has been organized here. Every Negro qualified to vote will be urged to register and participate in the special charter election on August 14th. The Reverend John E. Culmer is president of the League. So you can see that at this point, 10 years before he arrived in Miami, he was already working for the civic engagement of the people of Tampa. And it's actually really interesting. I found this article of a proposed park, Negro Park in Tampa, okay? So obviously the white citizens at this time were fighting against this, but I want you to perk your ears up, especially if you're already familiar with John Culmer and what he did here in Miami. Listen to the argument that he made for this park. So I'm going to read to you from the article. Ramsey Pollard, leader of the group of citizens from Jackson Heights, vigorously protested the the purchase of the property for a Negro park. Mr. Pillard made a talk to the board in which he told them he was speaking for hundreds of residents from Jackson Heights and Gary, and he was expressing their sentiments when he said they were all opposed to the matter. Reverend John Culmer, representing the Tampa Urban League, spoke on behalf of the Negro Park. Reverend Culmer asked the members of the board to give justice to the Negroes of the city. He cited how they had nothing in the line of playgrounds and entertainment. He told the board the health of the Negro would affect the other races if they became diseased, and pointed out how they could not develop strong bodies if they had no place to play. So, if you're already familiar with this history, you kind of know what I'm getting at here. But what we're going to see over these next couple articles is how Reverend Culmer kind of perfected this argument, okay? Because what he was mostly famous for is for heading up the Miami Herald expose on the living conditions in Overtown, which at the time was called Colored Town. And the crux of that argument was that the health of this community directly affects everyone else in Miami, whether you realize it or not. And so that we'll see how that argument evolves. But here's where it got its starting point, almost 10 years earlier in Tampa for a park. So put that in the back of your mind when we get to Miami. And this last article that I found was Negro pastor gets promotion to Miami. So this is actually when he's moved from Tampa to Miami. So farewell services for Reverend John E. Culmer, pastor of the St. James Episcopal Church, corner of Lamar and Constant Street, who leaves next week to accept the pastorate of St. Agnes Church in Miami, will be held at the church tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock and evening at 8 o'clock. Reverend Culmer has been pastor of the St. James Church for 10 years now. He came to the church here directly after being ordained in St. Michael and All Angels Church in Philadelphia in 1919. Since coming to Tampa, Reverend Culmer has done much welfare work among the Negroes he organized, and has published for years the Church Messenger, the monthly publication of the church. He was the first president of the Colored Convocation in the Diocese of South Florida. He is the past president of the Tampa Service Club, a civic organization among the Negroes of the city, and the Negro Voters League. The transfer from the church here to St. Agnes in Miami is a promotion for the colored pastor because the Miami church has the largest congregation of the colored Episcopal Church in the South. The congregation numbers over 1,000, which is really interesting. I actually did not know that St. Agnes was quite so large at that point. And I'll get into that in a second, but I actually found one last article from a 1928 Christmas. So the Tampa Urban League distributed gifts to 300 Negro children at a celebration stage in front of the league headquarters on Christmas Eve. The story of Christmas was told by Marian Anderson, and Reverend John E. Culmer, acting executive secretary, gave a brief talk explaining that the gifts had been made possible through the generosity of Tampa citizens. And real quick, because I love old photos, and I found this along with that little article I just mentioned. Here's a photo of 1928 Santa with a baby. And the kid looks like he's terrified. I would be too if you see this Santa. So thought that was a fun picture to share. So we'll continue. So that's what he was up to while he was in Tampa. And like I said, he actually came to Miami in September of 1929. And he served here as a priest. He served as a priest for St. Agnes Episcopal Church, and he remained there for 34 years. Under his leadership, the church's edifice finished construction. He continued furnishing the church with the first of its kind pipe organ for the black church at the time, a marble finished high altar, and later the parish was remodeled and a new social hall was built. In the 1940s, the parish became the largest black Episcopal congregation in the South and third largest for people of color in the nation. And it's actually really interesting because what these newspapers don't mention is how during the 1926 hurricane, St. Agnes actually suffered quite a bit of damage. And it's not to say that they were in dire straits, but the financial situation was also not great. So when Reverend Culmer came, and so it's doubly impressive because not only were they the largest congregation in spite of this difficulty, but it's incredible to see how much they grew after Reverend Culmer came and helped them finish the construction of the edifice and the remodeling of the church and everything. And obviously it helps to be a great leader. So Culmer's reputation, however, extended far past his own church. He was the first colored priest from the diocese to be elected as a delegate to the provincial synod. He was also the first black man to be appointed as the Archdeacon of the Diocese of South Florida. Then this was a position that he held for 20 years. In 1943, he also became the first black priest to be elected as deputy to the General Convention of the Episcopal Church. He was elected to this post a couple more times in his life. He was also one of the 2 black men who were selected to represent the Episcopal Church in Surrey, England. And hello, Andres, and thank you, Daniela, for tuning in. So we are talking about John Edwin Culmer. This is a photo of him. And so, continue. Culmer was, more than anything, famed for more than just his religious achievements. He was a true civic leader. His first big splash here in Miami, and I actually wanted to talk about this real quick. So the Tampa newspapers did a really good job of chronicling what John Culmer was up to in his life in Tampa. And unfortunately, the Miami Herald, the Miami News at the time did not keep up with that trend. They mentioned him once in 1930, and that was it until 1934. So there's 4 years that we just don't know what was going on. Unfortunately, that is only the Miami Herald, the Miami News, which were white newspapers at the time. The Miami Times at this point has not been digitized yet. Hopefully in the future, we'll be able to do that, and we'll be able to show a different perspective on what was going on in the community, in the Overtown community at the time. It seems really important to have different perspectives on these things. So, okay. So, essentially, the expose of the Miami Herald, of Goodwood Alley, basically focused, and they essentially focused on the living conditions, on the health conditions of people in Overtown, okay? And this expose garnered national attention, even so far as getting the attention of the federal government and FDR. It also led the mayor at the time to put Father Culmer in charge of a committee that was studying the slum conditions at the time. This expose directly led to the creation of a housing project that we know today as Liberty Square housing project that opened in 1937. It was the first of its kind project in Florida, but it was the second nationally because the first federal project was actually built in New York. So Culmer also served on various interracial, regional, and national boards, including the Negro Division of the Dade County Defense Council and the National Emergency Advisory Council. Just quick reminder, so this is close to World War II. This wasn't during World War II. These two, like if you remember we were talking about R.E.S. Toomey, these were created because I know that nowadays we tend to think of the world wars being placed in Europe, and specifically in World War II being in the Pacific. I don't think many people realize quite how close war was to our own shores. German U-boats and German submarines were always off the coast of Florida. So there's a reason why he was such a big figure, was a part of this. And he was also part of the Juvenile Delinquency Board. So Reverend Culmer was also appointed to Dade's Social Welfare Board by then Florida Governor Fuller Warren. This appointment was believed to be the first time that a black man was appointed to a major state governing board since Reconstruction. Culmer was also a force behind many of the things we've talked about here, like the First Five, which was the establishment of the first Negro police force in Miami and the precinct, and the establishment of Virginia Key Beach in 1944 and its preceding wait-ins. He also organized and instructed classes for the naturalization of black immigrants in 1933. And I think that's a really interesting point. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit more, because when we talk about the black community in Miami, we know that we're talking about people who were black Americans who were following the work line south. And we know we're talking about Bahamians who were coming into South Florida for the work as well. And the fact that this was mentioned and that he tried to organize and instruct classes for the naturalization of black immigrants, it poses an interesting question. The question is, why was he doing this at the time? I have a couple theories, because one of the things that is not really often talked about, but sometimes comes up in newspaper articles and different scholarly material, is kind of the relationship between black Bahamians and black Americans, and how that wasn't always the best relationship. So it could have been the naturalization of the black immigrants could have been for that. It also could have been a little forward facing, because when you were arguing on behalf of the black community as a whole, you could have had white arguments coming and saying, well, they're not really true Americans. These are Bahamians who are living here in South Florida. So it could also have been a way to take a notch away from white arguments against the black community. But those are just my theories. I would like to do more research. It could actually be a really interesting subject. So we'll continue. In the 1940 election, he actually also petitioned for police protection against whites. This was the year, and this is something we've talked about before on this show as well, that when the KKK was threatening the black community for trying to use their vote. So the petition was successful, and no matter the threats that year, it was actually a record-breaking year in terms of votes for the black community. Yes, Mr. Berry, I agree. It was divide and conquer. It was a lot of, and it's why it's really interesting to have the different newspapers and see different perspectives on it. So it's also rumored, and unfortunately I wasn't able to find any second confirmation of this. This is just something that I found in a book. It was also rumored that he was invited to speak at a Klan event. And he told them that if they continued to threaten the black community, he and other blacks would don the hoods and march alongside them to show how they will not be intimidated. Which, not saying that it's not true, but that is that is a pretty crazy story. So that might be a good section for the Is It True with Jocelyn. So he also founded and moderated the People Speak Radio Talkathon on station WFEC. Culmer was also an accomplished author and writing books such as 7 Years in Retrospect, Born in a Washtub, and he also wrote for the Miami Times column that was known as Black and White. H.E.S. Reeves, the father of Garth Reeves and the founder of the Miami Times, said this of J.E. Culmer: "To do justice to Father Culmer, it is only necessary to say that since he came to Miami, he has been a part of practically everything that has been worthwhile for the upbuilding of the community, religiously, politically, civically, educationally, or otherwise." And Culmer received honorary degrees from Bethune-Cookman College in 1955 and the Virginia Theological Seminary in 1960. He was recognized for his outstanding contributions and recognized as one of the nation's greatest humanitarians. Culmer married Nancy Taylor, but was widowed in 1941, and he remarried in July of 1947 to Leomi Scavella, and together they had 5 children. John Culmer now has a neighborhood center, a housing project, and a metro rail station, all named in his honor. Thank you, Black Family Library, for joining. And so now I have the pleasure of showing you guys a bunch of newspaper articles that I found. A lot of these are from the Miami Herald expose in 1934. So that expose was actually run over a series of 2 weeks in September. So we're going to go through a couple of photos and captions on that. But the first newspaper article I want to read to you is the Negro Episcopal Church to open, and this was on November 30 of 1930. Dedication of the new building of St. Agnes Episcopal Church, largest Negro Episcopalian congregation in the South and 4th largest in the country, will be held at 1750 Northwest 3rd Court today. 4 services will be conducted by the Reverend John E. Culmer, rector, beginning with Holy Communion at 7 a.m. Morning prayer and sermon will be heard at 10:45 a.m., a musical program at 4 p.m., and which Mayor C.H. Reeder is expected to speak with special services at 7:30 p.m., in which a class of 85 candidates will be confirmed. I wish Leomi Culmer was a wonderful lady. And are these available online? I'm not sure what you're talking about. If it's the newspapers, yes. And if it's about the segment, also yes. So, all right. So I'm going to start showing you guys some images, and I'm going to read them to you as we go through them. So let's flip this around. So this is a typical scene in Miami's Negro section where Reverend John E. Culmer, a Negro civic leader and pastor of the St. Agnes Episcopal Church, said, "Every young person that I have buried during these last 5 years died of tuberculosis." He says poor health conditions are caused by improper housing. So here you see pictures of the famous shotgun houses from sections of Overtown. Here's another photo. Housing congestion and increasing population is suggested by this picture depicting filthy living conditions. By the picture depicting living conditions in Northwest 4th Avenue near 14th Street. The houses are so close together that it is impossible to walk between them without scraping elbows. The clothes on the line may be family washing, but more than likely it is destined for delivery to some part of Miami which ignorantly and complacently believes itself not to be influenced directly by the filthy conditions in the Negro sections, with a house renting landlord describes as fierce. So this is, and I just want you guys to remember this going forward. So when I was talking about what went on in Tampa and how John Culmer formulated his argument for the Negro Park, that argument, you're going to see its evolution coming up soon. So here we have two parts, which is the work that is being done by the domestic workforce that lives in Overtown. It's integrally tied to the tourism business in South Florida. And Black Flaming Library, thank you so much for saying that. That's exactly what I was going to get at, and I'm going to keep going in with the landlords, so just get ready for that. So this is another house. The placard on the front of this house in Northwest 3rd Avenue near 16th Street proclaims that it was condemned by the City Building Division 2 years ago. But despite the fact that the porch floor is gone and complete and the porch roof is dangling dangerously, the house is occupied, as indicated by the clothing outside the window. So, real quick, I do want to talk about, let's be frank. So you would say to yourself, well, if these houses were condemned, why don't you just leave? Okay, let's talk about it. These laborers, domestic labor and actual work manual labor, they're not getting paid the greatest rates. All of these houses that you're looking at are not owned by the people who are living in them. They are renting in them. The people who own these lands are white men who are charging $2.50 a week to live in these shacks. So the argument that they put out when saying, oh, these buildings are condemned or this atmosphere is poor, they say, well, we don't make money on these investments, so we can't really fix it. Interesting. We've heard that argument before. The other point is that people who are not getting paid, how are they supposed to, thank you, Black Family Library, how are they supposed to take care of themselves? Because not only that you have to pay for your living expenses, you have to pay for food, you have to take care of your family, the clothing, you have a bunch of other concerns, and at the end of the day, you're not really able to save money. And let's be real about it too. Miami was rigidly planned this way so that and this is something that Father Culmer is going to talk about in an article we're going to read. The expansion of Miami was incredible. It faced almost 100% expansion. But in that time, the Negro section of Miami only got a 2% expansion. So while the population is growing, congestion is growing along with it. It wasn't because of poor planning. It was planned by the white citizens of Miami. So it was the natural end product of what was put into place in the first place. And I agree. The thing is that there is this sets up a lot of what we're going to see going down the line. And it's interesting that this was almost 100 years ago, and we're still facing a lot of the same problems today. So I'll continue showing you more images. So this is one of the occupied houses in Miami's Negro section, which is unfit for human habitation. Behind its boarded windows, disease and crime are bred. Also, read how Miami Herald kind of poses this and how the language is racially tinged, right? Sooner or later, to increase the all Miami health menace, see how the woman disposes of wastewater from the wash tub. There is no water supply. The house is located in Northwest 3rd Court, just off 19th Street. And this last photo is a little hard to make out, but I'll read you the caption. It says, refuse from this outhouse, gushing through a broken pipe, comes to the surface in the small yard, which is the only space left for wood chopping and carpet beating. Houses are built all around it. The outhouse, incidentally, is for the accommodation of 18 persons, Reverend Johnny Culmer, chairman of the Greater Miami Negro Civic League, reported. So, let me read you one more article. Well, I'm going to read you two more articles. So, this is talking kind of about how the landlord question that we were addressing earlier. So, start. Condemned houses will be torn down. Condemned Negro tenant houses belonging to the W.D. Davis estate will be razed and other buildings repaired, Dr. T.L. Laurie, one of the administrators of the estate, stated yesterday. The work of demolition will be started on Monday and at least 10 houses will go down, Dr. Laurie said. These houses are among the public nuisances which have contributed to the infestation of Miami's congested Negro section, to the general health and sanitation detriment of the entire city. Many of these houses were condemned by the city building department years ago, but instead of being demolished, they were used as depositories for filth and trash, thus becoming breeding places for vermin and disease germs, so that the Negro section became known as Miami's one quote-unquote bad spot. Davis, and now listen to this part. Davis, who owned more than 100 Negro tenant houses, died on January 14th, leaving hidden wealth which was inventoried at $102,637. And this is in 1934 dollars, so it's quite a considerable sum of money. A fortune in bonds and cash fell out of his safe at his home, 1803 Northwest 3rd Court, when the safe was broken in order to obtain a safe deposit box key. Much of the money was wrapped in small amounts, bound with rubber bands, just as he had collected it from tenants. Davis had come to Miami from Georgia and invested in about 140 Negro tenant houses. He lived frugally and complained that he was penniless, even as other owners of similar houses insisted that they were not making money on these investments and could not afford to make extensive improvements or space the houses far enough apart to avoid objectionable slum atmosphere. The crowding of the tenants and the damp houses caused by leaky roofs and rotting wood and other housing defects is blamed for the prevalence of tuberculosis and other diseases in the restricted area. So, unfortunately, this is something that we see repeated often in Miami's history. We put, there's a large fire, we demolished housing when it rebuilt expressway. So as a terrible important means where the people go, before I've been said, right? Leave us in a good place when the people bad. And so this argument here, this is in 1934, and then you have, later you have urban renewal. And you have the concrete monsters of the 60s and 70s, which were also in horrible condition. And what argument did you hear from the people who owned that then? In the 60s and 70s said, oh, well, we don't make enough money on these properties to make them any better. It was a lie then, like it was a lie in 1930s. And we had talked about in this segment before, we had talked about the Annie Coleman Gardens and what's going on with that housing project right now. That community has been spread to the wind. They have been given Section 8 and they have been moved. And they're going to basically destroy or upgrade that housing project. But the fine print of that line was that that is a private development and that they will also have control over who's going to live there going on later. So I wouldn't be surprised in 10 years we have another article coming about the terrible conditions and how a private development company says we don't have enough money to do anything about it. And that will be successfully 100 years of repeated history. So great job, Miami. So the last article that I'm going to read to you today is called Better Sanitation Campaign Desired. And Father John Culmer is going to talk in this, and it's really worth listening to. So the cooperative effort by city authorities, landlords, and occupants of Negro tenement houses can accomplish much towards immediate alleviation of sanitation conditions which have reached such dangerous proportions as to menace the health of the entire city. This is the belief of Reverend John E. Culmer, pastor of St. Agnes Episcopal Church and chairman of the fact-finding committee for the Greater Miami Negro Civic League. Transplanting of a part of the excess population now congested within a restricted area is an important part of any move aimed at improvement of conditions, Reverend Culmer said. So that part right there is really interesting, especially when we consider what happens to Overtown later, which is literally the transplanting of the community. So when I came to Miami 23 years ago, there were 5,000 Negroes living here, he said. They just drifted in because there was some work offered by the railroad. There was no special housing provision for them, and the houses just sprung up. I actually want to point this out as well. Henry Flagler, when he was developing his railroad down to Miami, actually did set up housing for his white workers. Just imagine, do a little history what if that same provision had been extended to the black workers who actually helped build the railroad, helped do the labor, and actually helped establish Miami as a city. How different would this story have been? Would the slums even have come up? Who knows? So, since that time, the Negro population has increased to 28,000 persons, but notwithstanding this increase, the territory to which they are restricted was expanded only 2 blocks from 20th Street to 22nd Street. Congestion was encouraged, of course, by conditions created by the 1925 real estate boom. The territorial expansion of the city as a whole is 98% as compared with only the 2% in the Negro area. There is no more room here for the future expansion so necessary to take care of the future population, which is bound to increase. We have a different type of population now than the floater type I first found here. If something is not done, conditions caused primarily by congestion will be aggravated. And listen to this part. Miami must clean up her backyard because if she don't, the conditions tolerated there will spread to her front yard where she wants to keep clean for the winter visitors and tourist business so important to the growth of the city. So, like I had said, if you listen to what was going on in Tampa, this is kind of the evolution of that argument. It is now not just about playgrounds and entertainment and health. It's our health and your money. And as soon as money gets involved, everyone's ears perk up. So, big tip of the hat to John Culmer here for reading the tea leaves and getting the Miami government to do something about this. And I'll continue here. So, Talbot Wegg, representative of the housing divisions of the Public Works Administration, Washington, reported that he found 600 persons housed on an acre of land in the Miami Negro section, whereas 175 persons is the maximum number regarded as consistent with modern ideas of sanitation and health. He said that he saw 15 shacks built on a single lot. Each shack of 3 rooms houses a family, and Reverend Culmer's committee reported that 12 persons living in one of these shacks, a rent of $2.50 weekly is charged. So, go figure. So, that pretty much covers it for Reverend Culmer. And, he has a lasting legacy here in South Florida. His influence is actually seen everywhere. He inspired many figures that we've talked about on this show. It actually, if you remember back to when we talked about Reverend Gibson actually said at the time that he was growing up in Miami and he had 2 people influencing him on which direction he wanted to go. He saw R.E.S. Toomey, a black lawyer, and he saw Reverend Culmer. And he saw that he wanted to be a lawyer. Reverend Gibson wanted to be a lawyer. But he saw the effect that R.E.S. Toomey had versus the effect that Reverend Culmer had. And that's what drove him to join fatherhood. To become the priesthood, right? So his legacy is still tied, and in a lot of ways, all the people we've talked about on this show, they all have influenced our history. And we live it every day, whether we realize it or not. And we benefit from it, and we have to learn from it. Because if we learn from our history, there's no limit to where we can go. So, thank you, everybody. I see there's been a lot of comments. I haven't really stopped to read them. So, let's go through it. You guys have a lot of good commentary on local politics. And sorry, Black Family Library, Reverend Culmer, was that a question for me, or was that about your conversation? So I'll wait for any questions. So tomorrow, I do not know if we're gonna have a virtual field trip. I hope we do. They have been great. On Saturday, we have Story Time in Color with Camila Pritchett. And so that pretty much covers me here. Hopefully if anybody has any questions, I'll answer them. If not, thank you for joining me again on another segment. I appreciate you. And real quick, I'll show you another photo of John Edwin Culmer. There you go. And Black Family Library, for your earlier question, so I actually got the newspapers through newspapers.com, which unfortunately I think requires a subscription, but they are available there. And I'm not seeing any questions coming in, but I appreciate everyone for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Again, remember to stay safe. You know that 166,000 people have died in the United States due to coronavirus. So please continue to stay safe. Hopefully we'll see the end of this soon. And thank you so much. So I will see you guys next week.